The New Year Sacrifice by Lu Xun, translated and read by Peter Rambo. It's the end of the Chinese lunar year that always feels most truly like the end of a year. In every town and city, it was exactly the same as one would expect, with even the sky itself coloured for the close. Heavy evening clouds were broken, only occasionally by scratches of shocking light. There was the ceaseless pounding of firecrackers for the kitchen guard, and the air was tainted everywhere with the smell of gunpowder. It was the night I was returning to my hometown, Lu Village. I say hometown, but I had no home there left, and so I was staying with a distant relative for a while. He was a generation older than me, so I called him uncle. He had graduated from Imperial College in Beijing and was a firm advocate of Confucianism. I didn't think he had changed much since the last time I'd seen him. A little older, perhaps, but still no beard. We went through the usual pleasantries before he said that I looked fatter. After this, he started ranting about the modernizers and criticizing their politics. I didn't take it personally. I knew it was men like Kang Youwei that he detested, and not me. It was awkward, and the conversation didn't really recover though, so soon after this, I decided to go into the study alone. I woke very late the next day, and after lunch went out to see some old friends and relatives. And the day after this was exactly the same. No one and nothing changed much, except they all seemed a bit older, and everyone was busy, getting ready for the New Year ceremonies. It was the grandest event in Lu Village, the New Year Sacrifice, paying homage to the god of fortune, hoping to bring luck and wealth in the coming year. Slaughtered chickens and geese and pork bought from the market was all thoroughly washed by the women until their arms were dark with blood, even staining some of their silver bracelets. When the food was ready, everyone would messily prod their chopsticks into the offering, laid out just before with candles and incense, inviting the god of fortune to join them. The ceremony was only for men, and afterward there would be firecrackers. Every year was the same. Every family was the same, as long as you could afford the offerings and the firecrackers, and this year was no different. As the sky turned a grim shade of grey, it began, unexpectedly, to snow. The snow was fine, the flakes the size of plum blossom. It was falling everywhere, merging with the smoke and activity, bringing Lu Village itself into a scene of chaos. When I returned to my uncle's study, the light of the snow was shining from the tiles, pouring a blinding light over everything. The New Year banner, written with a vermilion character Shou for longevity, looked stark. It had been written by the legendary Taoist Chen Tuan and had already fallen off the wall. It lay, rolled up, on the study table. The remaining half of the banner was still sticking on. Reason brings peace, it said. Feeling bored, I looked over the set of books, probably incomplete, on the table by the window. There was an archaic dictionary, some Confucian philosophy, and an analysis of the 4 classics. I decided that tomorrow I would leave. And, if I was being entirely honest, the incident with Xianglin's wife that happened just the day before was really troubling me. That afternoon, I'd gone over to the eastern side of town to see a friend. On the way, when I was passing by the river, I noticed the way she was looking at me. I could tell she was going to come over and talk. Of all the people I'd met in my hometown, she had changed the most. It was as though she was no longer herself. 5 or so years ago, her hair had been sprinkled with white, but now there was no colour left. She looked far older than someone in their 40s. Her face was gaunt and streaked with black and yellow. Her tragic expression was gone, and instead she looked static, as though carved from wood. It was only the occasional flicker of her eyes that even revealed she was a living person. In one hand, she was carrying a bamboo basket with a broken bowl inside it. In the other, a broken bamboo cane, taller than she was. Obviously, she had become a beggar. I stood quite still, waiting for her to ask me for money. "Oh, you're back," she said. "That's right." "You were just who I was looking for," she said, a light coming into her eyes. "A literate man, someone who understands the world. I need to ask you something." I just stood there. This wasn't the conversation I'd expected. "When someone dies," she said surreptitiously, urgently, coming closer. "When someone dies, can their soul live on?" Her eyes were staring into me. I could feel the hairs on my back raised in fear. Even in the school days, no intense questioning had ever put me in such a state of panic. I never considered what happened to the soul. What could I say? Most of the locals here believe in ghosts, I thought, hesitating, but perhaps she doubts it, or perhaps it wasn't doubt, but hope. Hope that there was an afterlife, or hope that there definitely were no ghosts. I didn't know what she wanted me to say, but I thought there was no point in making a cruel life even crueler. It would be better to tell her there was a place for souls. "Perhaps, yes," I stuttered. "So there is a hell?" she asked. A hell? I hadn't planned on her asking that. I tried to soften my answer, but what could I say? I suppose, logically, is it important? When someone in your family, someone you love, dies, will you see them again? She asked. You want to know if you'll see them again? I said. I felt like a fool now. My hesitation and loose words had caught up with me. To be honest, I said, trembling, I'm afraid I really don't know. I really don't know about souls. I ran back to my uncle's house before she could question me any more, feeling quite shaken by the whole experience. I thought that whatever I said would only cause her more grief, and perhaps it was just that she felt particularly lonely when everyone else was preparing for the celebrations. Might there have been another reason, though? Did she see something I didn't? I didn't want to give her an answer in case something later happened that I caused. In the end, I laughed it off and convinced myself that the meeting had no great significance, yet clearly I was taking it to heart. No wonder certain educationalists have called me a neurotic. I definitely ended with, I don't know, ensuring that whatever happened after was nothing to do with me. I don't know can be a most useful expression. Inexperienced, rash fools often take it upon themselves to solve people's problems or offer them medical advice, and when things turn out badly, they'll be held to blame. By saying, I don't know, however, one is free from all responsibility. I felt the need then for the expression more so than ever. Even speaking with the lowliest of beggars, I know I needed it then. But after sleeping another night, I still felt troubled. It was like some premonition of ill tidings. Surrounded by the hard falling snow and terrible weather, the feeling only intensified. I thought I should go back into town the next day. I went to a place I knew well, a fishing restaurant for the shark fin, an excellent meal for $1 back then, to see if they still had the same. Although I had none of the company from the old days, the shark fin didn't let me down. Regardless of anything else that happened, I was going to leave the next day. As so often is the case, however, in my life, unwanted events seem to come upon me whether I wish for them or not, and I had a feeling this was going to be one of those occasions. And it was. As it drew towards evening, I overheard a discussion from one of the inner rooms of the house. As soon as the conversation was over, I heard my uncle saying loudly, Of course, it would be a no there, wouldn't it? No sooner, no later. Classic indicator of the wrong sort. At first I felt taken aback, then worried, thinking he was talking about me. I looked out the door, but there was no one there. I managed to restrain myself until later, when the servant came in before dinner with the tea, and I thought I could finally ask what was going on. Who is my uncle upset with? I asked. With Xianglin's wife, he replied shortly. Xianglin's wife? Why? I asked. She's dead. Dead? I was stunned, and no doubt the colour had drained from my face, but if the servant had noticed, he showed no sign of it, and I gathered myself and asked, When did she die? When? Last night, maybe this morning. I don't know. How did she die? How did she die? From poverty, of course. He answered lifelessly without even having raised his head to look at me, and left. My worries, however, did feel in some way passing, for now that something I'd felt imminent had taken place, and I no longer had to take refuge in my advice to her that I don't know, or could feel blame for the fact that she had, as the servant said, died of poverty. It's fair to say my heart did feel lighter, and only from time to time did something still seem to pull on it. When we ate dinner, my uncle looked grim. I wanted to ask about Xiangling's wife, but I knew that his Confucian beliefs about the duality of the soul were clear. Still, he remained a superstitious man. So close to the New Year's sacrifice, it'd be completely unacceptable to mention death or illness at the dinner table. One could allude to things like that, but I didn't really know how to do so. The questions were there on the tip of my tongue, but I forced myself to bite them back. From his solemn look, I suspected that he knew I was going to choose this time to trouble him, and that I was the bad sort he'd been complaining about. Therefore, to set his mind at rest, I told him at once that I intended to leave Lu Village the next day and go back to the city. He'd impressed me to stay, and we finished eating quietly. In winter, the days are short, and with snow falling and even deeper darkness enveloped the town. Everyone was busy beneath the lamplight, yet outside the windows it was quiet. Snowflakes fell on the deep snow as if they were whispering, making the loneliness even more stark. I sat alone, under the faint gleam of the vegetable oil lamp, thinking. This poor woman, abandoned by everyone, had been left in the dust as a tiresome and worn-out plaything. She had left her own imprint, though, no matter how small. Those who enjoy life must have wondered at her for wishing to live, to keep on living. Now, at least, she's been swept away by the clear inevitable wind of fate. Whether there was an afterlife or not, I didn't know. But in this world, when one's tragic existence ends, perhaps it's for the best, both for those who tire of living and those who tire of living with them. I listened to the falling snow, thinking until I felt more at ease. And then the fragments of her life, like the broken flakes falling, began slowly to settle and come together. Xianglin's wife was not born in Lu Village. Early in the days of a winter past, my uncle's family needed to replace a maidservant. Mrs. Wei, who worked as a broker, brought her in to introduce her. Her hair was tied with white mourning bands and she wore a black skirt, a blue-lined jacket, and a pale blue vest. Her complexion was sallow, yet her cheeks remained a stubborn, ruddy red. She looked to be about 26 or 27. Mrs. Wei called her Xianglin's wife. She explained that the woman was a neighbor of her own mother's family, had been forced to find work because her husband, the head of her household, had died. My uncle scowled. My aunt knew what he was thinking. He didn't like that she was a widow. Despite this, however, she appeared well kept and capable. She had large, strong hands and feet, and with her downcast eyes and quiet manner, she seemed the type to be both obedient and hard-working. So, ignoring my uncle's expression, Xianglin's wife was hired. During her trial period, she worked from first light till the darkness fell, as if she hated to ever be still. She was as strong as a man. By the third day, she was employed and hired for 500 coppers a month. Everyone called her Xianglin's wife. No one ever thought to ask for her maiden name, but since the broker was from Wei village and said that they were neighbors, it was assumed that her surname was Wei too. She was a quiet woman and only really spoke when addressed. Even then, her answers were brief. It was not until a dozen days had passed that the household learned more about her life. She had a severe mother-in-law at home, as well as a younger brother-in-law who was already old enough to harvest firewood. Her husband, who'd also been a woodcutter, had passed away that previous spring. He had been 10 years younger than her, and that was the extent of what everyone knew. The days passed quickly, and the quality of her work never lessened. She wasn't picky about food, and never spared her strength. Everyone agreed that Master Lu's family had found a remarkable maid, as good as any man. As the new year approached, she took on the entire burden of the preparations, dusting the house, scrubbing the floor, slaughtering the chickens and geese, and staying up all night to boil sacrificial offerings. She did it all by herself, sparing the family the need to hire extra help. Far from being exhausted, she seemed content. Even a trace of a smile began to appear at the corners of her mouth, and her face grew fuller, fatter, and fairer. It was just after the new year had passed, when she returned from washing rice at the river, looking pale and terrified. She told the family she'd seen several men loitering on the opposite bank in the distance. She said they looked like her husband's cousins, and she thought they might be looking for her. My aunt was worried and wanted to know more, but Xianglin's wife wouldn't say any more about it. When my uncle heard, he scowled and said, No good. I knew it. I always thought she was a runaway. Well, his suspicions were right, and it wasn't long before everyone knew it. About a fortnight later, just as the incident was beginning to fade from everyone's mind, Mrs. Wei came back. She brought with her a woman in her 30s who, she claimed, was Xianglin's wife's mother-in-law. Although the woman had the appearance of a villager from the mountains, she carried herself with a confidence and self-possession and was quite well spoken. After the usual polite greetings, she offered an apology, explaining that she'd come to take her daughter-in-law home. With the arrival of spring, there was much work to be done, and with only the very old and the very young at home, they really needed all the help they could get. Well, she is her mother-in-law, my uncle said, and it's her right to take her if she wants. Her wages had added up to 1,750 coppers. She'd saved up all of it, giving it all to the Lu family to keep for her. She had never spent a coin, and now the entire amount was handed over to her mother-in-law. The woman took the money, along with the girl's clothes, offered her thanks, and left. By then, it was already noon. Oh, the rice. Didn't Xianglin's wife go out to wash the rice? My aunt suddenly said, remembering later. No doubt she was starting to feel hungry and had been reminded of lunch. Everyone went out to search for the rice washing basket. My aunt checked the kitchen, then the main hall, and finally the bedroom, but she couldn't find it. My uncle went outside to look too, eventually walking all the way down to the riverbank. And there it was, set down neatly on the shore, with a bundle of vegetables lying beside it. Some villagers told him that a boat, which had just left with a white awning, had been moored there since morning. The canopy was pulled tight, hiding whoever was inside. No one had thought anything of it at the time. But when Xianglin's wife knelt down to wash the rice, two men, looking like they were from the mountains, leapt down from the boat. One seized her while the other helped drag her aboard. She only managed a few stifled cries and then all went silent. They'd likely gagged her. Two women then followed them onto the boat. One they didn't know, and the other was Mrs. Wei. Those watching tried to peer into the cabin, but they couldn't see much. It did seem, however, that Xianglin's wife was lying, bound on the floorboards of the boat. That's awful, my uncle said quietly. Still, I'm sure. That same day, my aunt had to cook the midday meal herself, while their son, Anyo, tended the fire. After lunch, Mrs. Wei appeared again. Oh, it's really awful, a dirty business, my uncle said when he saw her. What do you think you're doing here? How dare you show your face here again? My aunt asked as soon as she saw her. She didn't even look up from the dishes she was washing. You brought that woman to us yourself, and then you plotted with those people to have her kidnapped. You brought disgrace on our village. What are the neighbours going to think? You're trying to dishonour our entire family. Excuse me, I was taken in by this as much as anyone, Mrs. Wei said. Actually, I came back here just to clear this thing up. When she came to me asking for a recommendation, how was I to know she was doing it behind her mother-in-law's back? I am sorry, truly. It was my own foolishness and lack of caution that offended you. You've been fair patrons. Fortunately, your family's known for its great generosity, and would never stoop to settle scores with someone as lowly as me, I'm sure. And I do promise to find someone truly remarkable this time, to amend for my mistake. Well, still, my uncle said quietly, and just like that, the incident of Xianglin's wife was ended, and before long, forgotten. Only my aunt remembered her, mostly because the maids she hired afterwards were either lazy, greedy, or both. None of them could compare, and so she often found herself talking again of Xianglin's wife. On those occasions, she would wonder where she was, secretly hoping that she might return one day. But by the following New Year, even she had given up hope. The New Year holiday was nearly over when Mrs. Wei arrived to pay her respects. She was already half drunk, explaining that she was late because she spent a few days visiting her mother's family at Wei Village. And, during their conversation, the talk naturally turned to Xianglin's wife. Oh, her? Old Wei said cheerfully. Oh, she's in luck now. When her mother-in-law dragged her home, she'd always promised her to the sick son of the He family over in Ho Village. So, only after a few days when she got back, they put her in a bridal sedan chair and sent her off. What luck, what fortune. My aunt seemed taken aback. That's quite a thing for a mother-in-law to do, she said. You speak like a lady of wealth. For us simple country folk in the mountains, nothing unusual. She has a younger brother-in-law who needs to be married. If they hadn't married her off, where would they have found the money for his wedding bride price, eh? Her mother-in-law is a clever, capable woman, a planner. That's why she chose to marry her off deep into the mountains. If she'd married her to someone from their own village, the bride price wouldn't have been that much, but because so few women are willing to move into those valleys, she managed to get 80,000 coppers for her. Now, her second son's wedding's almost over. The bride price for his new wife only cost 50,000, and after paying for the wedding expenses, the mother-in-law still has over 10,000 left. You see, isn't that a great bit of business? But Xianglin's wife actually wanted this, my aunt asked. Want? It's not a matter of wanting it or not. First, some of the young women have a bit of fight in them, so you just tie them up with a rope, stuff them into the bridal sedan chair, carry them off to the man's house, force the headdress on, do the ceremony, lock them in the bedroom. Simple as that. That's the end of it. For Xianglin's wife, I heard, had a bit more than just a fight in her. Some said it was because she worked in a scholar's house that she acted so differently from the others. Now, in my line of work, I see a lot. When women have to remarry, some cry and wail, some threaten to kill themselves, some cause such a scene at the groom's house that the ceremony can't even be finished. Some even smash the wedding candles, but Xianglin's wife was unlike anything they'd ever seen, they told me. They say she howled and cursed the whole way there, so that by the time they reached Ho Village, her voice was completely hoarse. And even after they dragged her from the sedan chair, the strength of two men and her younger brother-in-law couldn't force her to complete the marriage rituals. In a moment of carelessness, they loosened their grip, and oh, Buddha, she threw herself head first against the corner of the incense table. She cut a deep hole in her head, and the blood poured out. They used 2 handfuls of incense ash and bandaged the wound with strips of red cloth, but still couldn't stop the bleeding. Took everyone working together, finally shut her in the bridal chamber with her husband, where she continued to curse. It's truly dreadful. Mrs. Wei shook her head, cast down her eyes, and fell silent. And what happened after that? My aunt asked. I say she didn't get up the next day, Mrs. Wei said, raising her eyes. And then? Then, well, eventually she got up. By the end of the year, she'd given birth to a boy, who was 2 years old this new year. While I was visiting my mother's family, some people went over to Ho Village. I came back saying they'd seen her and the child. Both mother and son are healthy and fat. She has no mother-in-law over her now, and her husband is a strong man who knows how to work. They even own their own house. Truly, she's struck it lucky, a real fortune. After hearing this, even my aunt stopped talking about Xianglin's wife. But one autumn, a couple years after the news of her apparent fortune, Xianglin's wife reappeared at my uncle's house. On the table, she placed a round, bulb-shaped basket, and under the eave she set a small roll of bedding. She was still wearing the white mourning bangs in her hair, the black skirt, the blue jacket, and the pale blue vest. Her face was sallow, and the colour had left her cheeks. She kept her eyes downcast, their rims stained with traces of tears. All the light had gone from her. Just like before, it was Mrs. Wei who led her in. wearing a look of great benevolence as she spoke at length to my aunt. You just never know what's going to happen. Her husband was a strong, healthy man. Who could have known that the typhoid would cut him down in his prime? He'd actually recovered, but then he ate a bowl of cold rice and the illness came back. Fortunately, she had her son. She was a tireless worker. You know, she could chop wood, pick tea, and raise silkworms. She might have managed to hang on, but then who could have guessed that a wolf would take the child? Spring was nearly over, and no one expected a wolf to come near the village then. Now she has nothing. Her eldest brother-in-law came to take the house and kicked her out. With nowhere left to turn, she had no choice but to seek out her old masters. Since she has no ties left, and you happen to need a replacement, so I brought her here. After all, a familiar face is better than a strange one. I was so foolish, Xianglin's wife said, raising her broken eyes. I only knew that when it snowed, the wild beasts would come to the village because they couldn't find food in the mountains. I didn't know they would come in the spring too. I got up early that morning, opened the door, and filled a small basket with beans. I told our little Mal to sit on the threshold and peel them. He was such a good child. He listened to every word I said. I went to the back of the house to chop wood and wash the rice. Once the rice was in the pot, I went to get the beans to steam them. I called for little Mal, but there was no answer. When I went out to look, all I saw were beans scattered across the ground, but my little Mal was nowhere to be found. He never went to play at other people's houses. I asked around, but no one had seen him. Panicked, I begged people to go out and search. It wasn't until late that afternoon that they found one of his little shoes hanging on a thorn bush in the valley. Everyone said it looked bad, that a wolf must have gotten him. They went further in, and there he was, lying in the tall grass. His insides had been eaten clean away, but his little hand was still clutching that basket. She broke into a whimper, unable to finish. My aunt had controlled herself at first, but by the time the story was over, the tears had begun. She told Xianglin's wife to take her things to the servants' quarters, and Mrs. Wade let out a sigh of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from her. Xianglin's wife seemed more at ease than when she'd arrived, and without needing direction, began setting up her bedding. So, she returned to work in Lu village, and then everyone still called her Xianglin's wife. However, everything had changed. Within a few days, my aunt and uncle noticed that she was no longer as capable as before. Her memory was worse, and a smile never touched her deathly face. Gradually, my aunt's tone began to sharpen with discontent. When she'd first come back, my uncle had frowned, as usual, but given how hard it was to find good help, he hadn't strongly protested. He did, however, tell my aunt, "It's fine for a woman like this to do general chores, but tainted as she is, she must not touch the sacrificial offerings. You must prepare the ritual meals yourself. Otherwise the food will be tainted, and our ancestors will not accept it." A true man of Confucius, the most important events in my uncle's household were the ancestral sacrifices. In the past, these were the times when Xianglin's wife was at her busiest, but now she found herself with nothing to do. When the ritual table was moved to the center of the hall and draped with the ceremonial cloth, she remembered her old duties and moved to set out the wine cups and chopsticks as she had always done. No, put those down, I'll do that," my aunt told her, hurrying towards her. She withdrew her hands awkwardly and reached instead for the candlesticks. "Put those down, I said I'll get them." My aunt cried again, even more flustered. Xianglin's wife lingered, circling the table, but finally realizing that there was nothing for her to do, she walked away confused. The only task she was permitted to do that day was sit by the stove and stoke the fire. The villagers still called her Xianglin's wife, but their tone had changed completely. They still spoke to her, but their smiles were cold. She took no notice of this, however. She simply stared straight ahead and recounted the story that haunted her day and night. "I was so foolish, really," she would say. "I only knew that when it snowed, the wild beasts would come to the village because they couldn't find food in the mountains. I didn't know they would come in the spring too. I got up early that morning, opened the door and filled a small basket with beans. I told our little Mal to sit on the threshold and peel them. He was such a good boy. He listened to every word I said. I went to the back of the house to chop wood and wash rice. Once the rice was in the pot, I went to get the beans to steam them. I called little Mal, but there was no answer. When I went out to look, all I saw were beans scattered across the ground, but my little Mal was nowhere to be found. He never went to play at other people's houses. I asked around, but no one had seen him. Panicked, I begged people to go out and search. It wasn't until late that afternoon that they found one of his little shoes hanging on a thorn bush in the valley. Everyone said it looked bad, that a wolf must have gotten him. They went further in, and there he was, lying in the tall grass. His insides had been eaten clean away, but his little hand was still clutching that basket. At first, the story had a powerful effect. When the men heard it, their smiles would fade and they would walk away looking somber. The women did not only forgive Xianglin's wife for letting her son out of her sight, but felt complete sympathy, and they cried with her. Some elderly women who hadn't heard her story would even make a special trip just to find her and listen to the tragic tale. They would wait until she began to whimper, and then join her in weeping, sighing deeply before departing satisfied, whispering their own comments as they left. Xianglin's wife continued to repeat this heartbreaking story to anyone who would listen, often drawing a small crowd of 3 or 5, but before long everyone became so familiar with the details that even the most pious, sympathetic old Buddhist ladies could no longer find a single tear for her. Eventually, the entire town could practically recite her words by heart, and the mere sound of her beginning the story would start to annoy them. I was really foolish, really, she would start. Yeah, we know. You only knew that the wild beasts couldn't find food in the mountains when it snowed, so they come to the village. They would interrupt, cutting her off and walking away. Xianglin's wife would stand there in a daze, her mouth open and her eyes staring blankly at them. Then she too would wander off, seemingly feeling the sting of the snub, yet she still held a vain hope, trying to use other things, a small basket, beans, or even other people's children, to lead back to the story of her son. Whenever she caught sight of a child, or 2 or 3 years old, she would say, "Oh, if our little Mao was still alive, he would be just about that big." The children, scared by the look in her eyes, would tug at their mother's clothes and beg to leave. Alone once more, she would eventually walk away, discouraged. Later, everyone, even the children, knew what she was doing. If a child was nearby, they would ask her quite nastily, "Xianglin's wife, if your little Mao was still alive, wouldn't he be about this big by now?" She likely didn't realize that her grief, having been chewed over and savored by the town for so long, had turned into flavorless dregs, nothing more than a source of boredom now and disgust. However, she could sense the cold, sharp edge of their laughter, and she felt there was no longer any point in speaking. She would simply give them a silent glance and offer no reply. New Year always returns to Lu Village, and after the 20th day of the 12th lunar month, the kitchens hum with activity. This year, my uncle's household had to hire an extra male worker, yet the workload was still too much to handle. They brought in a Mrs. Liu as an assistant to slaughter the chickens and geese. However, Liu was a pious woman, a vegetarian who refused to kill, so she would only agree to wash the utensils. Aside from stoking the fire, Xianglin's wife had no other duties. Left idle, she sat and watched Miss Liu washing the dishes as tiny snowflakes began to drift down from the sky. "I was so foolish." Xianglin's wife sighed, staring at the sky as if speaking to it or herself. "There you go again, Xianglin's wife," Mrs. Liu said, looking at her impatiently. "Let me ask you, that scar on your forehead, wasn't that from when they bashed your head?" Yeah," Xianglin's wife mumbled in response. "Tell me then, why eventually did you give in?" "Me? Yeah, you. I suspect you were willing all along. Otherwise..." "Oh, you don't know how strong he was." "I don't believe it. I don't believe that you, with all your strength, you couldn't have resisted him. You must have eventually said yes, then blamed it on his strength afterward." "Oh, you should try it yourself," Xianglin's wife said with a faint laugh. Mrs. Liu's wrinkled face creased into a laugh as well, shriveling up like a walnut. Her dry, beady eyes darted from the scar on Xianglin's wife's forehead to the woman's own eyes. Feeling uneasy, Xianglin's wife immediately stopped smiling, turned her gaze away and went back to watch the falling snow. "Xianglin's wife, you really made a bad bargain," Mrs. Liu whispered softly. "If only you'd held out a bit longer, or just smashed your head till you were dead, you'd be better off. Now, after living with that second man for less than 2 years, you've ended up with a heavy sin on your soul. Think about it. When you go to the underworld, those 2 dead husbands of yours will start a fight over you. Which one should you go to? King of the underworld will have no choice but to saw you in half and share you between them. Truly, I think it's..." A look of terror washed over Xianglin's wife's face. This was a horror she'd never even imagined back in her mountain village. "I think you'd better make amends while there's still time," Mrs. Liu continued. "Go to the temple of the earth god and donate a threshold. Let it stand as your substitute. To be stepped on by thousands and walked over by tens of thousands. That way, you can atone for your sins in this life and avoid the agony and pain waiting for you after death." Xianglin's wife didn't offer a word in response, but clearly she was deeply troubled. When she rose the next morning, her eyes were sunken, surrounded by heavy dark circles. And after breakfast, she hurried to the temple of the earth god at the west end of town to ask about donating a threshold. The temple keeper stubbornly refused at first, and it was only after she broke down in tears of desperation that he reluctantly agreed. The price was set at 12,000 coppers. By this time, she'd long stopped talking to the other villagers, and they'd long ago tired of her story about little Mao, but word of her conversation with Mrs. Liu seemed to spread instantly, sparking a fresh wave of interest. People began to look for her again, though the topic had shifted now. Now, they focused their taunts on the scar on her forehead. "Xianglin's wife, tell us, why'd you eventually give in?" one would ask. "Ah, what a pity," another would chime in. You bashed your head for nothing. She could tell from the smirks in their tone that they were mocking her. She would simply stare back with her wide, vacant eyes, refusing to utter a single word, and eventually she stopped even turning to look at them. She kept her lips pressed tightly together all day, bearing that scar, the mark the town saw as a badge of shame, while she silently went about her errands, sweeping the floors, washing the vegetables, and rinsing the rice. It was nearly a year before she finally asked my aunt for her wages. She exchanged the money for 12 silver dollars and requested some short leave to go to the west end of town. She came back in less than an hour, looking immensely relieved. Her eyes were bright with the spirit they hadn't been imbued with for years, as she happily told my aunt that she'd finally donated her threshold of the temple. With the festival approaching, Xianglin's wife worked harder than ever. She watched as my aunt prepared the offerings and helped Anu move the table to the center of the hall. Then, without hesitating, she reached out for the wine cups and chopsticks. "Put those down!" My aunt cried out in a panicked, piercing voice. She jerked her hands back as if she'd been branded by a red-hot iron. Xianglin's wife turned a deathly ashen grey. She made no further move for the candlesticks, but simply stood there, staring blankly into space. She didn't move until my uncle arrived to light the incense and ordered her out of the way. This time, the change in her was complete, and by the next morning, not only were her eyes sunken, but her very spirit seemed crushed. She became incredibly timid, fearing the dark, jumping at shadows, trembling at the sight of anyone, even my uncle and aunt. She was like a mouse that strayed from its hole into the blinding light of day, otherwise she would sit motionless, as still as a wooden puppet. Within months, her hair had turned almost entirely white, and her memory failed her so often that she even forgot to wash the rice. "What's happened to Xianglin's wife?" my aunt would sometimes say, right to her face as a warning. "We really shouldn't have kept her, should we?" But Xianglin's wife remained the same. All hope of her ever recovering was gone. Eventually, my aunt and uncle began to talk of sending her away, back to old Mrs. Wei. When I was still in Lu Village, this was only talk, but judging by a recent condition, it was clear they actually did it. Whether she became a beggar immediately after leaving my uncle's house, or after staying with Mrs. Wei, I don't know. I was startled then, awake by the deafening roar of firecrackers close by. I saw the yellow, pea-shaped glow of a lamp and heard the continued crackling of strings of firecrackers. My uncle's family was performing the New Year's blessing. I knew it must be nearing dawn. Half asleep, I heard the muffled, endless breaking of distant firecrackers merging into a thick cloud of sound that stole the sky. Clashed with the swirling snowflakes, the noise embraced the entire town. Wrapped in this bustling cacophony, I felt a sense of lazy comfort. All the misgivings I'd felt from the day through the early evening were swept away by the atmosphere of the festival. I felt as if all the gods and ancestors, having feasted on the incense and the offerings, were staggering drunkenly through the air, preparing to bestow boundless happiness upon the immaculate people of Lu Village.